I just want to invest in people that really want to be the best that they can be. Hello, everyone. This is Todd Scrima, and this is another Be Your Best series. It's a little different take this time, and I have always felt strongly about having good emotional health. And I think a couple things on this topic. First of all, the topic is 4 emotional dysfunctions that create the most pain in our lives. So you might be saying, Todd, are you a psychologist? I'm not. I'm here to give you kind of a layman's view of what I've witnessed and what I've seen over the years with having thousands of employees and coaching thousands of companies over the years and individuals. And these things, if you don't know about them as a coach, it really puts you at a disadvantage because you don't know why someone's doing something. And I picked 4 topics. One is codependency, one is drug and alcohol abuse, third one is narcissism, and a fourth one is anxiety. And some of these things I know pretty well. And if I haven't, I'm going to be super open and tell you how these relate to my life. So no judgment, please, judgment-free zone. But I think it'll help you understand and encourage you that everyone has these things. And I think part of life is if we can learn these things to identify them earlier, we're going to live a happier life because we'll understand. And especially in these days, guys, I know that some people have talked about this. And I don't want to blame social media, but I think it's certainly how Americans are, and with the invention of social media being so prevalent over the last 30 years, I think it really has pushed this envelope into things like narcissism and codependency and having more anxiety because I'm not where I think I should be, comparing ourselves to other people, and all these things get wrapped up in some of these emotional things. So let me go through this. And again, what you're going to hear from me is a pretty consistent message, and that is it's okay to get professional help on this. I'm hoping that this podcast develops some awareness, because I believe the first step to any problem is awareness. And once we have awareness, then we start to recognize when we do it. We start being open to getting coaching on it. But what you're going to get from me is to get some professional help, because these things, think about it logically. If we're, 20, 30, 40, 50 years old, we've been living a certain way for a long time. And if we're going to change that so that we can live a happier life, it's going to take some time. It's going to take some effort. So I don't have a guest on here. I thought of having maybe a psychologist on here. And I thought, I just really want to give you more layman terms, because I think sometimes people who do deal with these issues professionally, it can be a little overwhelming to go so deep on the subject. So I'm kind of going to be a little surfacey and tell you, hey, first of all, what the definition is, or what my definition is for the most part, on when I think these things start becoming a problem, some signs to look out for, and then some tips on how to get some help. So anyway, let me dive into it. Let me start with codependency. So this is the hardest one to understand besides narcissism. Codependency, I'll tell you a quick story. About 6 years ago, I was with a therapist, and I was going to this therapist to understand and overcome becoming divorced, because I was in that process. And, for those that have been there, a lot of us have, it's very emotional. And so I just thought, hey, let's not get through this on my own. Let's have someone in my corner that can coach me through this faster. And so part of what came out of that was this exploring of codependency. And I'll share how that relates to myself in a minute. And at one point, I said, the definition is excessive emotional or psychological reliance on someone or something. That's the simplest definition I can give you. Excessive emotional or psychological reliance on someone or something. Well, when I heard that, I talked to Joan, who was my therapist at the time. God rest her soul. I said, Joan, if this is true, everyone's codependent. She says, yeah, about 99% of people have some form of codependency. It's like a lot of things where there's a spectrum to all these things. There's a spectrum to drug and alcohol abuse. Hey, I just do it on the weekends, and it doesn't cause major problems in my life, but on Sundays I do wake up with a really bad hangover. Maybe not a full-blown alcoholic, but it's causing some problems in your life. It's on the spectrum. Codependency is definitely a spectrum, and it's very hard to understand. And so let's talk about some of the signs and dig a little bit deeper. Difficulty in identifying your feelings. If you're like me, and hopefully you're different, but I had a real bad habit of pushing my feelings down. And I have a lot of feelings. I'm naturally an empath. And so I can feel someone's emotions very easily. And I think a lot of people can. And so it's very easy for us to become codependent. We have difficulty identifying our feelings because part of the reason is we're concerned about other people's feelings and putting those ahead of ours. That's an example. Difficulty communicating, valuing the approval of others more than valuing yourself. Ooh, that's a deep one, right? When you think about it, that's a deep one. Again, something I've been guilty of is, I might say, hey, instead of, I'm trying to think of a good example. Hey, to make this person feel good, I'll just do this, even though I don't really want to do it, as an example. Having poor self-esteem. So this can be complicated because I have had codependent in business, and I'm going to explain that. I didn't have low self-esteem, but yet I really am concerned about what people think and putting their values above my own sometimes. So how this came out for me in business is if an employee quit, I'd be like, oh my God, everyone's going to quit. And I would blow it up into this big codependent storm, if you will. That's an example. If I lost a deal, maybe I was working on a business deal and it didn't come together. Now I say, hey, it wasn't meant to be. What I used to do is, oh my God, did I do something wrong? This is going to, cause the company to be less successful. And I would, again, create this storm of codependency and anxiety combined, of what that outcome meant. And then, if I step back and look at it, I'm like, well, does that really make a difference in the big picture of things? Is this really going to matter in 5 years? And I would self-coach myself and get myself back on the railroad tracks. But that may take, 5-10 years ago, it may have taken a week. Now it takes more like a day. And so I know that there is real progress with that. And I think this is one of those ones that some people have it very, very bad. And similar to all these things, when you look at them, they're tied a little bit to how we're raised. If you think about it, I had a psychologist tell me one time that a child's morals and values are 80% formed by the time they're 8 years old. And if you just think about that, it puts a lot of pressure on parenting. It's like, you're literally telling me that how this little person is going to live the rest of their life is mostly formed by the time they're 8 years old. And that formity is mainly based on my style of parenting and how they see me and how they perceive love and how I act and words I say. That's a lot of pressure. But all of these things I'm going to cover, in my opinion, and I think most people that are professionals in this area would say this, a lot of it comes from how we're raised and the environment that we were in and what we experience. I'll give you an example of this. I had when I was younger, a lot younger, in my 20s, I would be thinking, what is this whole thing about, people coming home from the military and having post-stress symptoms? I'm like, get some therapy and get over it. And it was a very immature way of looking at how these things can affect our minds. And I'll give you an example. I may have used this before, but when I was in my early 20s, I had a family member die that was a child, and it was very traumatic. It was my nephew, and I went through about 2 years. About once a week, I would have nightmares of drowning in a swimming pool, and that one event really affected me. As a smart adult, it affected a smart young adult. So yeah, if you're in the military and you saw some combat and maybe had to shoot at people or kill people, yes, that's going to create some major trauma, and it's going to take years of working on it to get through. So that's an example. When we talk about codependency, you're not going to just, oh, I'm going to watch some YouTube videos and I'm going to be all better. None of these things work that way. And I think that's why they tend to haunt us for our entire lives, because it takes a lot of really focused work with a professional in order to get past some of these things. One of my friends really suffered from codependency, and what I discovered is her parents, and I never knew this until I talked to her about it. She had a sister, and her sister was kind of the bad girl, and she became the good girl, getting straight A's, great at sports, got a college scholarship, all of these things. And her parents, this is the part I didn't know, her parents fought miserably almost every day, calling each other F words and just really, really horrific things. And what she learned is, again, the definition of codependency: excessive emotional or psychological reliance on someone or something. Hey, how this translated to this young child is, hey, I'm going to be the good girl because then mom and dad are happy. When I'm the good girl, mom and dad are happy, and they don't use those words against each other. If you think about that for a moment, even though this person grew up to be very successful, this whole idea of codependency is something that she had to get some professional help on. I have several friends that have had this. I had this problem mostly in business. And that's why I bring that up, because I think when people delve into this topic, they get a little too siloed on, hey, well, this is just for families, or this is just with my spouse, or it's just personal life. I think it can happen. I have a friend of mine who was codependent on his idea of becoming a Major League Baseball player. And this is a young man, now roughly 30. And he hurt himself. He was doing really well in college baseball, and he was destined, he felt, to play pro. And that was the only thing he ever thought of, and it consumed him. And then he got injured, and that could no longer happen. And it led into years and years of physical pain, illnesses, depression. And so that one idea of being too codependent on, hey, if I don't become a baseball player in the big leagues, I'm nothing. Now, when I say that out loud, that makes no sense to any of us. But when you're that person that was told your entire life you're going to the big leagues, you got a college scholarship, you got scouts talking to you, coming to see your games, and our identity gets very wrapped up in that. Just like my identity has been very wrapped up in what I do in business. And I understand now that that's not healthy. And I tell people things like, and I'll say some of these things out loud, self-coaching for myself mainly, is, hey, I have a personal life. I am a parent. I do have trips to go on. I do have a lot of interest in sports. I do read books, because my identity was so wrapped up in being that big businessman. And so codependency, I just touched on it. This is a huge subject. And I want you to think of all these things like a dartboard. So people that maybe have codependency really bad would be in the center of the dartboard. But as you go out of the dartboard in circular, then there are different shades and types. And it's a big subject. And it's not really talked about. You know, this is not something people will talk about, things like bipolar or depression. But they won't talk about some of these other things that really affect more people, such as codependency. I think it affects at least 90% of people, this subject. But we don't really talk about it. And it's hard to find information on it. So anyway, this is a big one. It's a subtle one. It's something that people don't talk about a lot. And I just wanted to talk about that one first. The next two that I'm going to cover are really hard. And the next one is drug and alcohol abuse, and then I'm going to tackle narcissism. So I heard this on drug and alcohol abuse. I heard it put this way one time, and it always stuck with me. Drug or alcohol abuse is any time that drugs or alcohol create a problem in your life. And it was a different way of thinking about it. It wasn't, hey, that drug's illegal, so you shouldn't use it. You know, society says that you shouldn't use it, so, you know, you're bad if you use it. I think that's one way of looking at this, but I really like that definition. I think it's anytime drug or alcohol creates a problem in your life. Before I get into this more, again, I'm just giving you these are my opinions. I do strongly believe that some people have the genetic disposition, or gene, as some people call it, towards alcohol and drug abuse. I didn't really buy into that. And then years ago, I got into watching the TV series. I forgot what it was called. It was Dr. Drew or something, Hollywood Stories or something like that. And it was famous people that were going into a rehab clinic, and they filmed the whole thing. And they did not a documentary, but a series on this that was on television for years. And I watched, I think it was the first or second season. And there was one point, I forgot the actor's name, but he was very famous. He escaped from the safe house, if you will, where they were receiving treatment for several weeks. And he escaped and went straight to the drug dealer's house to get a fix. And this is a person that was good looking. This is a person that obviously had money, you know, and to do something that drastic that you know is going to harm you. You know, after I watched that, I was like, you know, I think some people just have that gene. So that was years ago, maybe 20 years ago. And then I started coaching more and more people, and it's a thing. You know, it really, really is a disease. I also believe, in the same light, I believe that drug and alcoholism can happen to people who don't have the gene. And in my opinion, this is how it works. I talked to an alcoholic once, and we had a 2-hour ride, and he told me this story, and I'll never forget this as long as I live. He was addicted to meth, and then got cleaned up from that, and then got addicted to alcohol. And then had been sober at this time that we're having this car ride, maybe sober 5 years. And I said, hey, can you tell me the whole story? We've got 2 hours. Tell me the whole story. And I'll paraphrase what he said. He said, Todd, I started coming home, and I had one drink to unwind, one beer. And then it was 2. And then, you know, I didn't get the rush from 2, so it was 3, and so on. And he says, the best way I can describe it is it's like starting in your chest, in your heart. It's like a black darkness, and it slowly feeds through your body. And it's like a spider web of darkness. And that metaphor really stuck with me. And what he was trying to explain was, hey, this sometimes happens like over time. That's why as I got older, again, I remember some of these things. I used to think, if people are going to have a problem with drug and alcohol, it's going to happen in their younger years, you know, college years, stuff like that. I've actually seen more people struggle with this as adults than when I was younger. And I think that whether it's boredom in your life and we're looking for something else, it starts with that one drink and then goes to 2, and you fast forward, and you know it's this it's this real problem where we feel addicted and we feel that we need that drug or alcohol. So again, big picture, some things that would tell you that drug and alcohol is a problem. Late to work, getting a DUI, or just drinking and driving, period, putting others at risk. You miss your workout because you just don't feel good. Physically not feeling well, you feel cloudy. Obviously, the list goes on. Could be physical ailments like, hey, I'm gaining weight. Hey, my spouse is angry at me because she feels that I'm drinking too much. So it's creating fights in the marriage. The list can go on. So if you go back to the definition, anytime the drug or alcohol creates a problem in your life, then you could say you're at some spectrum of an alcoholic, like the dartboard. I've had family members struggle with this. I do believe it does run in families. And I think that one tip that I have is if you're one of your parents or grandparents were, addicted to drugs or alcohol, there's a chance that you have that gene, in my opinion. I think they're also that this can come about over the course of time, and we don't think much of it. We're having a drink when we get home, and then it turns into a couple drinks and things like that. So for myself personally, I've always been very cognizant of this. I was always afraid to ever touch a drug because logically I knew that wouldn't end well. I am a high D, a type A personality, and I just chose not to touch it. Now with alcohol, it's, in my family, we grew up on one side of the family in the Italian culture, and I was drinking half wine, half water with dinner when I was probably 5th grade, something like that. Now they would probably turn my parents into CPS, but we grew up in that. We also grew up in an era where when we had family functions and we were having fun, there was always alcohol around. And so one of the things that I've just been very cognizant of is, hey, it's okay to enjoy that. But realize if there's signs showing up that are causing you to, not feel good or put yourself at risk or anything like that, that you got to keep it in check. I don't feel I personally ever had a problem with it, but I do think, especially in my younger years, I was binge drinking in college, and a lot of us did that. Again, probably not healthy, and hopefully something that we grow out of, and that we got to be cognizant of. So, what's the solve for this? The only thing that I've seen to work is constant long-term professional help. Constant long-term professional help. I have an acquaintance that struggled with alcohol, and she was going to AA for 3, 4, 5 years, and then she quit. And it was within 4 months that she came home one day and just was wasted. And it's, so I think it's one of those things where you say, hey, I need help with this, and I'm always going to need help. And certainly if you can self-control it and you're on the outer skirts of that dartboard, I think there is self-control that you can do. But when you start getting closer to the bullseye, there are certain people, I believe, that you're always going to need that help. So the next one's a tough one. Oh, it's a tough one. Narcissism. So the simple definition that I use is excessive or inflated sense of self-importance. Excessive or inflated sense of self-importance. Well, when I say that, they're like, Todd, that's everybody. Okay, so again, there's probably some sort of narcissism on everyone's dartboard. What we're focused on in my talk is the real problematic ones are the ones closer to the center. Let's go through some signs. Lack of empathy. That's a big one. Now in my coaching career, I have coached a lot of narcissists, so I can see this one pretty clearly. I actually think that most people cannot. But here's some signs: lack of empathy, entitlement, selfish, exaggerated self-importance, Here's one to pay attention to: inability to handle criticism. In other words, they're pretty much always right. Always have to be right. So, and seeks a lot of admiration. That's another key sign. Seeks a lot of admiration. There's different types of narcissists. One of them is called the closet narcissist, and they seek constant approval from others. I've seen this in the workplace where when you have someone that is always saying, "Hey, did I do a good job? Hey, how did I rate on that job? Hey, you haven't given me a compliment in 2 days." Those are signs. And it's a closet narcissist because they're not so outspoken about it, but it's how they feel inside that's creating those comments. So why is narcissism so hard? Here's why it's hard. Number one, it's hard to spot sometimes. So when I say these definitions and these signs, chances are someone popped in your head. But here's the toughest part is most psychologists will tell you there is not a solve to narcissism, or they will tell you it's the hardest thing to change. This is why it's tough. And so if you read in between the lines, what that means is that you have to separate from them because you're never going to win. Now, this becomes super emotional when it's someone in your family or your spouse. And you're saying, Todd, just divorce the situation. Like, don't talk to them. Hard for us to do. I mean, you're talking about maybe a family member or a spouse. That's hard. Let me give you a couple feelings, and this will help. When you feel like you're in prison to that person, or you can never please them. Those are two signs. You feel like imprisoned by them, or you feel like you're never able to please them, like your best is never, ever good enough. Here's something else to understand that makes this hard is narcissists. I call them baby narcissists. So someone who has narcissism are attracted to other narcissists. So if you think about that, that can get pretty complicated. Narcissists also feed a lot on codependence. So I covered codependency first. Remember, codependency is excessive emotional or psychological reliance on someone or something. Codependents are easily influenced by narcissists. And I don't want to get political here, but our last president, you could see that those narcissism signs. I mean, I hate to bring this up, but it's someone that we can all relate to. He was never wrong. Sometimes he would say things and just couldn't back them up with any sort of facts. So very exaggerated. These are signs that I spoke about earlier. Now, when it comes to politics, I like to say I'm not Republican or Democrat. I'm what is best for the people, what's best for the country. So I'm very non-political, but I just bring that up so that people can get a feel for what that would feel like. Now, interestingly enough, oftentimes these narcissists are very successful. And so they'll use that success in order to, and it's confusing to people. They're like, well, he or she's this way. They must know what they're doing. They must know what they're talking about. So I must just follow them. And they tend to be very influential, very influential. So this is a big one. And I think it's a really tough one when you hear a lot of psychologists say, hey, you just can't cure it. Wow, that's a statement. It's way different. Say that someone suffers from anxiety or codependency. Those are things that we can work on. We can get some help. We can massage. Narcissism, most psychologists will literally tell you to get out of the relationship. And that's harsh for a lot of us to experience that. So that's narcissism. Again, there's all kinds of different types. One of the things that I'll point you towards, and I struggled to give this, but we're in a world of information. There's books that you can get on this stuff. There's some great YouTube videos. Millions of YouTube videos, but there are professional psychologists that if you get on YouTube you can kind of tell if they know what they're talking about. I know I watched one, I don't know, 6 months ago about narcissism, and this lady did a whole series. She dedicated her whole life as a psychologist to this, to spreading the information and education about narcissism. And she just did a bunch of free YouTube videos, and she's awesome. So you can kind of tell when you watch some of these things that, information's free. That doesn't mean the person giving it is always great at what they do. So I think you got to use discernment around that. But there is some great information out there on any of these topics, I'm just trying to bring some of these to light because these are things that, again, the 4 emotional dysfunctions that I see bring people the most pain, period. Well, let's delve into the last one, one that I know well, called anxiety. Here's my definition: a feeling of worry, of nervousness or uneasiness, leading to compulsive behavior or panic. A feeling of worry, nervousness, or uneasiness, leading to compulsive behavior or panic. I have a friend of mine that struggles with a lot of anxiety. I have dealt with a lot of anxiety. So let me talk about myself first, and I'll give you this other example. So again, this is me being in therapy a couple years now, and my therapist tells me, Todd, you suffer from anxiety. I was like, wow, okay. Well, I'm super busy. I write a lot of, I like to get a lot of stuff done. I don't like to watch TV for 4 hours. Like I'm a busybody. Is that what you call anxiety? And they're like, no. I mean, those can be signs certainly, but it's more how you feel. And that really struck me. And I never forget, she gave me an assignment. She says, hey, being able to slow down and to truly enjoy the moment is something that anxious people struggle with. And she says, so I want you to pause 3 times a day, and I want you to just feel the air across your face or look at a tree and how beautiful it is. And I thought it was the corniest thing in my life. But I when I'm instructed to do something, I'm a good student and I'm going to do it. So I had to go on my phone and have it beep at me 3 times a day to pause for 2 minutes and do that exercise. So I did it. And funny, I felt different. I felt better. I felt less anxious. I felt more in the moment. And so I've struggled with anxiety. I've worked on it now for about 5 years, and it's a night and day difference. It really is. Now, I can still get very anxious. I have a lot of energy. I really do. I have what I had one person tell me, I have busy brain. I'm always thinking of stuff. I'm always excited about stuff. And so that's how this played out for me. Again, going back to an earlier example, how this codependency and anxiety can be tied together for me is if I had an employee leave, I would feel very anxious, and I would also feel very codependent, like, oh, this is going to really hurt the business. This is really going to hurt this department. This is really going to hurt, this other, leader. And they work together to put me in a tizzy, in a psychological state that wasn't healthy. Okay. So those are some examples. A recent example where I have a gentleman who's a good friend of mine. He says, hey, I need your help. This is a couple of weeks ago. And I said, hey, what's going on? He says, well, I'm having panic attacks. And I said, wow, gosh, you're got millions of dollars in the bank. Your business is doing better than ever. Your marriage is solid. Your kids are great. You live in a Mac Daddy house. Like, what's going on? And so I asked him to get some help around this, because I think what's happening, one of the signs of anxiety is panic. That's more an extreme, condition. But it just because I didn't have panic attacks doesn't mean that I didn't have anxiety. And again, it goes back to that spectrum board. This individual is having so much anxiety that, it's in the bullseye. Like he's literally had to go to the hospital a few times with panic attacks. And we had a long talk about it, and we're getting some help. But here's a person, the reason I tell you that story is because I think sometimes when we talk about this, you're like, Todd, people who can't pay the bills have real anxiety. People who can't feed their children have real anxiety. Things like this. No, it happens to totally healthy, successful people. And that's why it's not talked about a lot. I think that some people will talk about these things, but most successful people will never let you know that they have anxiety. Or they don't even know they have it, like me. So when you talk about these things, it's very interesting. They're kind of hidden. Maybe drug and alcohol abuse, they tend to be hidden by the person, but we all know what that is. But the other three, when you talk about codependency, anxiety, and narcissism, they tend to be covert. They tend to be under the radar. They tend to be things that we don't commonly think about. But the reason I bring this up, all of these things, and this is just four. There's all kinds of other things. These are just four that I commonly see over and over again. They're certainly not the only ones. It's about us living a better life. It's about us working on ourselves to create a little bit better tomorrow. And I will tell you that when I've seen a lot of people go through these things, as I have, and it's way different. It's like a before and after moment. And we've all had these epiphanies. It's like what your life before kids, your life after kids, way different. Okay. Some of you may argue that that's better or not, but my point is that my encouragement is on all these things. There is a real before and after moments that happen. They also tend to be things that aren't easily changed. I talk about for codependency, drug and alcohol abuse, and anxiety, it's getting professional help. On narcissism, it's about separating yourself from whoever that person is, because chances are they're really not going to change at all. And the biggest mistake that we make is thinking that we can change them. When you look at all of this, these are just four things that, when I started this podcast, I'm thinking, hey, what are some subjects that I could do for everybody? And you might be an executive listening to this. You might be a 16-year-old kid that's getting an education and maybe spots one of these things in yourselves. You might be a stay-at-home mother or father that sees some of this stuff. Or it may be something that you're like, hey, I'm going to send this to my friend that I think has one of these things, and have them listen to it. So if you feel that way, I would strongly encourage you to take this, text it to one or two or three friends or coworkers that you think this would do some benefit with. Because my goal is not to professionally help you. I'm not professionally trained in this, but I've dealt with it a lot, not just personally, but with so many different relationships in my life. And there is we can make progress on any single one of these. They tend not to be fast progressions. It starts with education. It starts with awareness, just like anything in life. And that's the big idea. When it comes to, anxiety, for example, it's not easy to retrain your emotions. I mean, shoot, I was 45, 44 years old, had to retrain my emotions. That's hard, right? That's a big step. So one of the things that I did, just going back to anxiety, I started being in the moment more. And how I did that is I developed a morning routine. And that morning routine for me consists of working out and then doing my gratitude journal, which is just where I write down 3 things that I'm grateful for. And really what I focus on in that time is feeling that way. It's not just doing an exercise, it's feeling that way. And then I also, this may not fit for you, I started this thing about a year ago where I just openly talk, instead of prayer, silent prayer, openly talk to my God out loud. And it's 2-3 minutes. It's like a conversation. It's like talking to a buddy. That's how I feel about it. I felt kind of weird doing that, but then I had a spiritual leader of mine tell me it was okay. So I did it. And so it just helps me start the day off right. So I don't have so much anxiety starting the day. And so that's an example of things that we can start to do. I think that paying for a professional, you'd be shocked at what $300 a month can do, or $200 a month. See someone once or twice a month. Have them give you assignments and really work on these things. And then I mentioned YouTube. I want to be careful of that. I'm sure some more well-known people like Dr. Oz or Dr. Phil, I'm sure they have some podcasts on this. They have YouTube. So if you want to deal with someone more trusted and not just go on YouTube blindly, maybe that's a concept that you go after some bigger names. So that's an overview of those 4 things. And guys, what my biggest fear in doing this podcast on this subject is people will say, well, what's he know? He's a businessman. I think in order for us to be successful in life holistically, that it's a matter of looking at all these things. Psychology and emotional health are much more important than people give it credit for. Certainly there are tactics, business type tactics that I do on my business podcasts that are more, hey, this is how you do this. But that emotional health is usually where I see people struggle in life. We can talk about all kinds of things, but the emotional health of ourselves and how we feel day to day is super, super important. And I don't think there's enough awareness around it. And that's why I wanted to do this. So I hope it helps, guys. I hope that it gives you some insight from a layman on maybe how to spot some of these things. Maybe we see some of these things in ourselves. Maybe we see some of these things in our children. Maybe we see these things in leaders or coworkers that we have. Share this with them. It's a start, right? It's a start of a movement. And how much joy that we have in life and is I think should be more important than it is in today's society. I think it's more important than a big house. I think it's more important than the car. I think it's more important than status. I think it's more important than the career that we have. There are people that are really happy, and they, according to most of us, we'd look at them and say, that's a pretty rough life, but they don't feel that way at all. And if you just think of that for a second, that will tell you how important this is. What's the difference? You got a multimillionaire that has all these things and is suffering from some of these things and not happy at all. And then you've got people that have almost nothing and they're super happy. Who would you rather be? And I think that's at the heart of what we're talking about. It's not just the progression of what we typically value in our society. Putting more value on this emotional health is so critical, I can't tell you. Let me end with this, guys. I think any of you can do anything. And I truly mean that. I truly mean that. I've seen people do things in life that, frankly, I would have never thought they could do. And maybe they didn't either. But they take steps. They step out on the skinny branches. And they take major moves, shifts in their life to create a better life. And ultimately, that's what we all want. A little bit better life. I told you before on these podcasts, we feel happiest when we feel like we're making progression. My concern with covering these is there's some pretty big topics and it may have to mean a lot of change, but don't not do it because it takes a lot of work. Everything in life that is worth having takes a lot of work. There is no quick steps. There is no Hollywood diet to these things. These are big subjects that we've been living a certain way for a number of years. Most of us listening to this are now adults, and it's ingrained in us. How we feel is ingrained in us. It's automatic. And so we got to disrupt that. We got to find a new way of dealing with it. Okay. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope I didn't overstep my bounds as a professional. I just felt very strongly that these are big things that need to get out there and be talked about more. Thanks, guys. Have a great day. I just want to invest in people that really want to be the best that they can be.